Very excited to welcome to the show for the first time congressional candidate running in Massachusetts' 4th District, Ihsan Laiki. Welcome to the Damage Report.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Very glad to have you here, and interested to learn about your platform, what you intend to do if you get elected. Before we jump into that, though, this is the first office that you're running for?
That's right. I'm a federal regulator. I worked at the Federal Reserve to regulate the biggest banks in our country who had received the bailouts in 2008, and to make sure that we don't have to bail them out again and to catch their lies.
Exactly. And we have some of those concerns based on some of the bailouts that have been part of the pandemic response funding. But I wanted to find out more about your decision to run. You're running for the congressional seat that's being vacated for Kennedy, who is running his primary challenge on the Senate level. So when was that decision made, and what was your thought process when you were deciding to make the launch from being on sort of the bureaucratic side to running for office?
Well, as you know, we live through multiple crises right now. The COVID pandemic that took the lives of over 130,000 people. We have a government that called it a hoax before it started to do anything to help us out. And we have millions of people who have lost their jobs and lost their health insurance and can't put food on the table. All this in the midst of the environmental emergency that's putting the Arctic on fire and the Amazon on fire. But we also understand that these issues existed before COVID, and that when we see now, for example, the effects on communities of color being disproportionately losing loved ones, that those are the results of hundreds of years of systemic racism in our country that hasn't been addressed. Same with healthcare, same with environmental justice, and so on. So my decision to challenge Congressman Joe Kennedy came from multiple frustrations about the direction that our country was taking and the complacency that I was seeing in Congress, and especially as a Wall Street regulator, that I saw Democrats voting to deregulate, to give more power to Wall Street in a time where we shouldn't have. And there's of course the personal lived experiences aspect, being a woman of color, being a Muslim woman, being an immigrant, being someone who has lived in poverty in the richest country in the world. I was driven to do everything that I can to dismantle oppressive systems that stand between us and the America we dream of.
And you've talked about your time as a regulator. It is an interesting time that we live in, where I think just in the past week I saw news that Kennedy was going to be involved in a hearing with pharma companies. I believe it was pharma that he had personally invested a significant quantity of money in, and still held those investments while the hearing was going on. And we're just a couple of months out from multiple representatives and senators dumping stock or buying up new stocks as they were being briefed about the pandemic, but hiding information. I'm curious, your history, being a regulator, how would that affect the way you would address some of these and other issues were you to hold the office?
Well, the first thing I would start with is closing the revolving door. When I was a regulator at the Fed, I saw how my colleagues chose to get out of the Fed, especially during regulation, walk across the street to the banks like State Street, Morgan Stanley, and Goldman Sachs, and triple their salaries. And that created a very, very difficult way for us to regulate, because all of a sudden these banks know what we're doing at the Fed. They know our models. They know what we're trying to, what methods we're using to try to find their lies. And we had to recreate the wheel over and over. But that revolving door is also between the Wall Street and Washington, right? Where you see the top executives of Goldman Sachs becoming Trump's advisors and allies. And that's gotta end, so we can actually have regulatory agencies that work for the people, and we can have a Congress that works for the people. And that's why I don't take any money from corporate PACs or lobbyists or fossil fuel executives. The list is really long to be committed to the people at 100%.
I know that one of your key priorities is a green recovery plan. I'd love to hear about how you see that being implemented, what should be a part of it. But I'm also curious if you think perhaps there's any way that some of the continuing conversations about how we should respond to the pandemic, should some of the sorts of philosophical underpinnings of a recovery plan like yours be a part of the conversation right now?
I absolutely. I think that the Green Economic Recovery Plan addresses some of the deep issues that we have. It builds on the Green New Deal, and it addresses the issues of the communities on the front lines that have been denied economic opportunity for generations, and how we're going to create those opportunities for them at this time as we safely go back into reopening the economy. But before we go into the recovery, we have to immediately address relief. And relief hasn't been addressed the right way in this country. We need to urgently give $2,000 a month for the period of the pandemic and beyond to every individual in our country. This will help people put food on the table. This will help people continue to have some level of dignity in their lives. We have to usher in Medicare for all. Immediately we have to make sure that people have health care. How are we going to treat a pandemic when people cannot call a doctor when they're sick? And so the urgency of relief, it shouldn't only be looked at as an economic urgency. It's a humanitarian urgency. These are the lives of our people, and we have to make sure that everybody is living a life with dignity in the richest country in the world.
And looking forward in terms of addressing climate change and all of that, let's say that hypothetically November comes, you're elected. Let's say that Trump is thrown out and Biden is put in. Biden has his new climate plan, which is more in line with what some progressive activists are pushing for, but he has a history of saying that he doesn't support banning fracking or those sorts of things. How do you see your role with Biden in office in terms of moving him to where he needs to be on this particular issue?
Well, I mean, that's the beauty of electing bold progressives across the country, is that we unapologetically stand up for justice and for the people. I'm someone who grew up in Morocco, and in the summertime, we lost water. And when the water came back, it tasted like bleach. And in my district, I met with single mothers who are spending over $65 a month to buy clean water for their children, because both our infrastructure is crumbling and the fossil fuel companies have power over polluting the water we drink. And so that's gonna end. I believe that that Biden will have a listening ear that will tend to justice and will tend to what the people need, and we're gonna need to push him on that. That's what democracy is about.
Yeah. Well, we're not to Biden yet. We still got Trump, and in one of your campaign ads, you refer to yourself as his greatest nightmare. Oh, why is that?
Look, I was that girl that you walk by the sandwich shop and you see her, making sandwiches, mopping the floor, and you're like, yeah, she's there. You don't know what's going on in her life. You don't know if she's been sexually harassed or suffered wage thefts. You don't know any of that. You see her, she's there. And that same girl fought the biggest banks on Wall Street. And that same girl is willing and going to fight the biggest oppressive systems that have stopped us from having the American dream that I came here for. That American dream means that everyone in this country has their basic necessities to live. That's shelter, healthcare, and education, and a dignified job with dignified pay, clean air and clean water. I don't think we're asking for something that is unachievable. After all, this is America. This is the richest country in the world, most powerful country in the world. And anyone who will come in the way of dismantling my American dream and the American dream of all the people in our country will have to face the consequences.
Okay. And if someone's watching this and they want to find out more about your background, your platform, where can they get that information?
You can learn more at ihsane.org. It's ihsane.org. Please do join us. We ask that you help us make calls, send out texts, and bring more relational organizing to this movement building campaign. We are a multi-generational, multi-racial movement who is going to spearhead the bold progressive movement in Massachusetts and across the country.
Ihsane, thank you so much. Appreciate you joining us on the show today.
Thank you.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.